over in Ireland. Once upon a time there was a man and his name was Paddy McGee. Now, Paddy McGee didn't do much with his life, but the one thing he loved to do was to walk. So every day he put on his hat and his coat and he'd step out the door and he'd walk and he'd walk and he'd walk. He'd walk wherever the road took him, wherever the path wandered, he'd follow. Well, one day, Paddy McGee was walking and walking when all of a sudden, would you believe it, it started to rain. Who would have thought it in Ireland? Anyway, it was raining and raining and raining and he was getting soaked. His boots were sodden, his coat was sodden, his hat was leaking onto the end of his nose, onto his beard. He was getting wet, wet, wet. Well, he started to run to try to find shelter from the rain, when all of a sudden, high up on the hill, he saw a little cottage and he saw light in the window. So he scrambled up the path and he ran to the door and he tum, tum, tum on the door. Well, the door opened and there was this old man. And Paddy McGee said, "Forgive the time of the day, my friend. Forgive me knocking at this time of the night, but I seek shelter from the wind and the rain and the cold. Could I come inside?" Well, when the old man saw who was standing there, his face lit up with a smile. He said, "Paddy McGee, come inside," he said, and he grabbed Paddy by the arm and hoiked him into the house, and the door was shut, and before you know it, Paddy's hat was off his head, his coat was off his shoulders, his boots were off his feet, and he was sitting in front of the fire warming himself. And Paddy McGee said, "I'm so grateful, old man, but tell me, I don't know you. How do you know my name?" And the old man said, "Well, everyone knows Paddy McGee. When Paddy McGee comes to your house, always give him the best place to sit beside the fire. Oh, and give him a glass of beer." The next moment, Paddy McGee had a glass of beer in his hand. And he said, "Old man, this is very kind of you, but please tell me, how do you know my name?" The old man said, "Everyone knows Paddy McGee. When Paddy McGee comes to your house, always give him the best place to sit beside the fire. Always give him a glass of beer. Oh, and give him some food. Wife, come out of the kitchen." An old woman came waddling out of the kitchen. She said, "What is it? What is it?" "Oh, Paddy McGee," she said, "I better go and cook." And with that, she scuttled off into the kitchens, and it wasn't long before Paddy could hear the clank of pots and pans and smell stew on the air, bubbling on the stove. And it wasn't long before in she waddled with a great pot. She put it down at the table. She said, "Come and eat, Paddy, come and eat, come and eat." So Paddy McGee sat down at that table and he started to sup, and sure was it not the finest stew he'd ever tasted. And he ate and he ate and he ate and he ate until the bowl was empty. He said, "Oh, now, please, old man, old woman, I've got to say I'm grateful, and please don't think that I'm not, but you must tell me, how do you know my name?" And the old woman said, "Everyone knows Paddy McGee. When Paddy McGee comes to your house, always give him the best place to sit beside the fire. Always give him a glass of beer and always give him some food. Oh, and give him somewhere warm to sleep. Don't worry, Paddy, you can sleep in our bed. We'll sleep down here beside the fire. We'll change the sheets. You'll have a lovely, comfortable bed, a lovely soft feather pillow to rest your head upon." And Paddy said, "I'm very grateful, and please don't think that I'm not. But can you tell me, how do you know my name?" "Everyone knows Paddy McGee," said the old man. "When Paddy McGee comes to your house, you give him the best place to sit beside the fire. You give him a glass of beer, give him some food, and give him somewhere warm to sleep, and always in return, he'll tell you a good story." "A what?" "A story." "Sure," said the old man. "Doesn't everyone know you're Paddy McGee? You're the finest storyteller the length and the breadth of Ireland." "Me?" said Paddy. Now, Paddy McGee's an awful common name across these islands. You must have him mixed up with somebody else, because I don't know any stories." "Oh, come," said the old woman, "just tell us a wee story. Just a short one to finish off the day. After all, you've eaten our food and you've warmed yourself beside the fire and you're going to sleep in our bed. Go on, Paddy, just tell us a little story." "I don't know any stories," said Paddy McGee. "You must have me mixed up with somebody else. I tell you, Paddy McGee is an awful common name through all the length and breadth of Ireland." "Oh, I see," said the old man. And in another moment the door was open and Paddy's wet coat and hat and boots were back up in his arms, and the old man was shoving him towards the door. He said, "I've got a good mind to throw you out. That's how you repay our kindness." But the old man looked again and saw that the rain was still coming down. He said, "But I wouldn't throw my worst enemy out on a night like this. So you can spend the night in this house beneath this roof, but you're not having our bed. You can sleep in the spare room where there's not a scrap of furniture, and I want you gone by first light. Do you understand?" Paddy McGee said, I do, and I'm grateful for that. I'm sorry for the misunderstanding. And you see, Paddy McGee is an awful common name, and you must have me... Enough. Up the stairs, gone by first light. So, Paddy tramped up the stairs, and he looked through one door, and there was that soft bed with its feather pillows that he could have been resting his head on if only he had a story to tell. And he went through the other door, and there wasn't a scrap of furniture in that room, and he sat down with the door shut, and he pulled his coat over his shoulders. And when his teeth had stopped clattering from the cold, eventually Paddy McGee closed his eyes and fell fast asleep. He didn't sleep for long. He woke when he heard a noise. Thump, thump, thump. He opened his eyes and listened. Thump, thump, thump. He looked and saw, out through the window, through the little narrow pane of glass, there were 3 faces staring in through the window, and each one was taking in turns to thump, thump, thump against the windowsill. And then the 3 faces spoke, and they spoke with one voice, and they said, "Who will it be to open the window? Who but Paddy McGee?" Now when Paddy heard his name, he couldn't help himself. He found himself standing up. He walked over to the window. He didn't know why. He couldn't stop himself. He opened the window. "Who will it be," said the 3 voices, "to climb out of the window? Who but Paddy McGee?" Paddy couldn't help himself. The next moment he found himself climbing out of the window, slipping down the wet slate roof, and landed with a thud on the damp ground. And there, these 3 faces were 3 figures dressed in black, tall black top hats on their heads, and beside them on the ground lay a coffin. Who will it be to carry the coffin? Who but Paddy McGee? And when Paddy heard his name, he couldn't help himself. He reached down and he hoiked up that coffin up onto his shoulder, and the 3 figures wandered off, and poor Paddy was set to follow. And they led him down the hill, down and down, till they came to the stream. Across the stones of the stream they went, and poor Paddy followed with the coffin on his shoulder, and up the other side, and through the woods, and through the fields, and higher, and down the other side, and on, from valley to valley to valley, until at last they came to a small churchyard. And there they stopped amongst the grey stones. Who will it be to dig the grave? Who but Paddy McGee? When Paddy had put down the coffin, he couldn't help himself. He picked up the shovel that was there on the ground, and he began to peel back the wet sods of the earth, and he dug and he dug and he dug. He dug a hole in the ground 6 foot long and 3 foot wide and 6 foot deep. And there he was, in the bottom of that grave, scraping away at the gravel with the shovel. And no sooner had he finished, no sooner had he stopped to catch his breath and rest on the handle of the spade, when the 3 figures looked down and said, "Who will it be to put the coffin in the grave now? Who but Paddy McGee?" Paddy couldn't help himself. When he heard his name being spoken, he reached up and he pulled on the handles of the lid. The coffin came clattering into the grave, the lid fell off, and the coffin was empty. Who will it be to get into the coffin? Who but Paddy McGee? When Paddy heard his name, he couldn't help himself. He lay down in that coffin, stretched himself out in that casket, his head at one end, his feet at the other, his arms crossed over, staring up into the stormy night. But inside he was fighting. Inside he was struggling and wrestling, and then suddenly he jumped up out of the grave and ran as fast as his legs would carry him. He didn't dare look over his shoulders. He ran and ran and ran, straight over the lich gate, out across the fields. He ran and ran and ran, from valley to valley to valley to valley, until he found himself back in the woods, and down through the trees he went, and jumping over the stones across the stream, he ran and ran all the way back up until he saw the little house, and he scrambled up the path, climbed up the drain pipe, in through the window, slammed it shut behind him, and pulled his coat over his shoulders. And of course, eventually, when Paddy McGee caught his breath, he fell fast asleep. And the next thing he heard was the crowing of the cockerel, and he pulled the coat down from his eyes, and the sunlight was streaming in through the window. "Oh," he said, "it was a dream. It was nothing but a foolish dream." And he stood up then and reached for his things, but as he stood up, he felt the bruise on his shoulder, the strain in his bones, and then when he looked at his hands, they were blistered and calloused from all the digging, and he looked at his feet, and from his boots to his knees, from his knees to his boots were caked in mud. That was no dream. That actually happened. "I'm not spending another moment in this house," grabbed his things, ran down the stairs, and he was just about to leave when the old man and old woman were sitting there beside the fire early that morning. And the old man threw his chin over his shoulder and said, "Going, I hope?" And Paddy McGee said, "Yes, I am. I'm not spending another moment in this godforsaken house." And the old man said, "What do you mean, godforsaken? What on earth's happened to you, man?" And Paddy said, "All right, well, I'll tell you." And he sat down on the end of the bench by the fire, and he told them every last word of it, told them exactly as it happened, as I've just told it to you. And when he'd finished, of course, they looked at him and they smiled. Well, what do you know? When Paddy McGee comes to your house, even if you don't give him the best place to sleep, he'll still tell you a good story by the morning. And from that day on, of course, Paddy McGee was known as the finest storyteller the length and breadth of Ireland. And whenever he went walking, as so often he liked to do, when he came to a stranger's house at the end of the day, he would knock at the door, the door would be flung wide open, and he'd be welcomed in. And they'd give him the best place to sit beside the fire, and they'd give him a glass of beer, and they'd give him some food, and they'd always give him somewhere warm to sleep, and always in return Paddy McGee would tell them a story. And that is the end of that.